Dusk had a way of settling into Devil's Breath Canyon like a verdict. No wind, no birds, just the long shadows of rock spires leaning over the trail like silent judges. I'd ridden that road 100 times, and every time it felt the same. A place that remembered violence and expected more. My name's Cole Maddox, rancher by trade, loner by nature, and a man who didn't go looking for trouble unless trouble came calling first. That evening it did. I heard it before I saw anything, a thin, sharp cry that bounced off the canyon walls. Not the cry of an animal, not the cry of a woman calling for help out of habit. No, this was survival talking. The sound of someone who had one last breath to spend and chose to spend it screaming. I nudged my horse forward, boots brushing the dust, rifle strapped tight across my shoulder. The canyon bent wide, and that's when I saw torchlight. 3 burning spears of flame, held by 3 men who looked like they'd ridden straight out of a bad omen. And trapped against the rock face was her. Small, barefoot, Apache, maybe 18 at most. Hair tangled with dust. A cut along her cheek still bleeding. She held a small knife, but her hand shook so hard she could barely keep it lifted. One of the men shoved her so hard her head struck stone. I felt something hot coil in my chest. Teach her a lesson, one of them growled. Girls should have known better than to run. Another grabbed her wrist, twisting it until she cried out again. That's when I stepped off my horse. The torchlight hit me full in the face. I didn't shout, didn't posture, didn't warn. I just let my boots grind on gravel as I drew my revolver and held it low, arm steady. My voice carried across the canyon, calm and carved out of iron. She's with me. All 3 men froze, and for a moment, the only thing alive in that canyon was the tension, thick as gun smoke, and ready to explode. The storm hit harder as Cole Maddox pushed through the last stretch of rocky trail, the Apache girl cradled in one arm like something fragile and burning. She weighed almost nothing, too little. Hunger had carved shadows into her face, and fear kept her trembling even in unconsciousness. When his cabin finally appeared through the pines, a lone shape against the rolling black of night, Cole felt a kind of relief he hadn't felt in years. He nudged the door open with his boot and carried her inside. The warmth of the hearth rolled over them, soft and amber. He laid her gently on a buffalo hide near the fire. The moment her back touched the fur, her eyes snapped open. Wild, alert, a knife glinted in her shaking hand, small, but held like she'd killed with it before. Cole raised both hands. Easy. You're safe here. She didn't understand all the words, but safe seemed to land somewhere inside her. Her breathing slowed, though the death grip on the knife didn't loosen. Cole didn't move closer, didn't crowd her, just crouched beside the fire, slowly feeding it kindling. Ain't gonna hurt you. Ain't gonna touch you unless you say so. Her dark eyes watched every motion, sharp as a hawk's. When he slid a tin cup of water across the floorboard toward her, she hesitated, then snatched it like someone expecting it to be taken away. She drank in small, distrustful sips, never looking away from him. Cole spoke softly, careful. Name's Cole. Pause. You. She pressed a hand to her chest. Talona. The way she said it carried weight. Something sacred. Cole nodded. Talona. Good. A branch cracked outside. Just the wind, but Talona jerked upright, knife raised, eyes wide with terror. She whispered something fast in Apache, a prayer or a warning. Cole stepped between her and the door. Ain't nobody getting through those hills without me knowing. If those men tracked you, they ain't here yet. But Talona shook her head violently. Whatever chased her, it wasn't a simple fight. It wasn't bad luck. It was deliberate. Cole saw it now, etched in the tightness of her jaw, the shaking grip, the fading bruises on her arm. This wasn't a girl who had stumbled into trouble. This was a girl someone wanted silenced, and they were willing to kill to do it. The wind rattled the shutters that night, groaning like some old spirit wandering the ridge. Snow hissed against the cabin walls, and the fire popped in the grate, throwing long shadows across the floorboards. Talona sat cross-legged beside it, wrapped in one of my wool blankets. Her dark hair hung in loose, wind-whipped strands around her face. She'd barely spoken since I brought her in, until now. She lifted her eyes, frightened, fierce, both at once. My family, they live South Canyon. Small valley. Good land. Her words came slowly, shaped by effort. 3 men come. Want silver. Want land. My brothers say no. They kill him. The flames cracked sharply, as if reacting to her pain. I felt something cold settle inside my chest, an old memory rising like smoke from a dying ember. Raiders. Flames. My wife's hand slipping from mine in the dust. I swallowed hard and stared at the fire instead of her face. Those men, they hunt you all the way out here? I asked. She nodded. I run far. Hide in rocks, trees. But they follow. They want to finish. Her voice trembled, just once. I think I die before you find. I didn't say anything for a while. Sometimes words didn't fix anything. Sometimes silence did more. After a long moment, she pushed herself to her feet. Her movements were stiff from cold and injury, but determined. She walked to the shelves where I kept beans, dried corn, venison jerky. She touched each item carefully, almost reverently, then looked back at me. I cook, she said simply. Help. I strong. I work. You don't need to. I do. Her tone was soft but firm. So I let her. She moved quietly, purposefully, heating a pot, slicing what little meat I had, crushing herbs she'd taken from the pouch by her hip. The smell filled the cabin in minutes, rich, savory, warm. I hadn't eaten a meal made by another human being in months. When she handed me the bowl, she didn't smile, but her eyes held a glint of pride. My mother teach, she murmured. Her mother teach before. I took a slow bite. Talona, this is real good. For the first time since I'd found her cornered in that canyon, something in her face eased. Not happiness. Not yet. But the beginning of trust. 2 people, carved by loss, shaped by loneliness, sharing warmth in a storm-beaten cabin. 2 souls with matching scars, finally not facing the night alone. The morning broke cold and sharp, the kind of dawn that sliced the world into hard lines of blue shadow and pale gold. I saddled my horse without a word, feeling Talona's eyes on my back. She didn't ask where I was going. She already knew. Danger leaves tracks, and I had to see how close it had come. The ridge behind my homestead rose like the spine of some ancient beast, all jagged rock and narrow deer paths. I rode slow, letting the horse feel the ground, scanning for broken brush, bent grass, the small signs men never pay attention to, but always leave behind. It didn't take long. Fresh boot prints, hoof marks, the remains of a campfire still breathing its last curl of smoke. They were close. Too close. I dismounted, crouching low to the dirt, touching the tracks like I could pull the story out of the soil. 3 sets of prints, then more. Heavier ones. 5 riders total now. Maybe 6. The men from last night hadn't just regrouped. They'd gathered reinforcements. A sudden crack split the quiet. Crack. Bark exploded beside my face as a bullet punched into a pine trunk inches from my ear. I threw myself behind a boulder as the shot echoed down the ridge. A voice followed, drifting out of the pines with a lazy confidence that chilled my spine. We'll come for the girl and anyone stupid enough to hide her. Boots shifted. Hooves scraped. Then silence swallowed the forest whole. I waited 3 long breaths before mounting up and riding back harder and faster than I'd come. By the time the cabin rose into view, smoke curling from the stovepipe and Talona, standing in the doorway like a shadow, I already knew the truth had to be spoken plain. I swung down from the saddle. They know you're here, I said. Talona absorbed the words without flinching. She didn't tremble, didn't whisper or break. She only stepped closer and asked, soft but steady, "You still help?" I met her eyes, fierce, wounded, unyielding, and nodded once. I said you're with me. I told her. I meant it. Night settled over the ranch like a heavy quilt, dark and cold, pressing against the cabin walls. The wind carried the scent of dust and distant horses. Cole Maddox knew that meant riders were out there, gathering, waiting for the chance to strike. If he and Talona didn't prepare now, they wouldn't live to see the next sunrise. He started with the windows. Cole hammered thick boards over every frame. each strike echoing across the empty plains. Splinters flew. Nails squealed. The cabin, once open and quiet, began to harden into a fortress. He moved down the walls with practiced rhythm, board, nail, breathing steady, jaw locked. "They'll come from the north first," he muttered, half to himself, half to the ghosts he'd buried long ago. Out back, Talona crouched beside a log, sharpening her knives on a whetstone with patient, precise strokes. Sparks flicked against the dirt like tiny fireflies. Her face was calm, almost serene, but her hands never hesitated. This wasn't her first hunt. It wasn't her first night preparing for men who wanted blood. When she finished the blades, she rose and climbed the small ridge above the barn. With dried grass and thin twigs, she built 3 bundles, Apache smoke signals, silent warnings. When lit, each plume would drift in different directions, confusing enemy scouts and giving Cole a chance to flank. She worked quickly, her silhouette sharp against the moonlit sky. Cole watched her from below, impressed by the quiet competence she carried like armor. When she came down, she tapped him twice on the arm and began showing him a series of hand signs. Simple ones at first: move, stop, get down. Then more subtle signals: 2 riders, danger left, circle wide. Her gestures were swift, graceful, carved from years of survival. Cole memorized each one. Together, they dug a shallow fire trench along the ranch's northern fence line. When lit, it would force attackers to funnel through the center, straight into Cole's rifle sight. They filled water barrels and set them by the barn door. Fallback positions. Last stands. Every step planned, every angle covered. Inside the cabin, Cole opened a wooden trunk and carefully lifted out a lever-action rifle, his late wife's. He held it a moment, thumb brushing the worn stock, before offering it to Talona. "Belonged to someone brave," he said quietly. Talona cradled the weapon with both hands, bowing her head. "I fight with honor," she whispered. And in that moment, standing amidst shadows and preparations, they weren't strangers anymore. Not savior and rescued. Not rancher and runaway. They were allies. A chosen family forged by danger, bound by the stand they had decided to make together. Night settled over the ranch like a heavy quilt, dark and cold, pressing against the cabin walls. The wind carried the scent of dust and distant horses. Cole Maddox knew that meant riders were out there, gathering, waiting for the chance to strike. If he and Talona didn't prepare now, they wouldn't live to see the next sunrise. He started with the windows. Cole hammered thick boards over every frame, each strike echoing across the empty plains. Splinters flew. Nails squealed. The cabin, once open and quiet, began to harden into a fortress. He moved down the walls with practiced rhythm, board, nail, breathing steady, jaw locked. "They'll come from the north first," he muttered, half to himself, half to the ghosts he'd buried long ago. Out back, Talona crouched beside a log, sharpening her knives on a whetstone with patient, precise strokes. Sparks flicked against the dirt like tiny fireflies. Her face was calm, almost serene, but her hands never hesitated. This wasn't her first hunt. It wasn't her first night preparing for men who wanted blood. When she finished the blades, she rose and climbed the small ridge above the barn. With dried grass and thin twigs, she built 3 bundles, Apache smoke signals, silent warnings. When lit, each plume would drift in different directions, confusing enemy scouts and giving Cole a chance to flank. She worked quickly, her silhouette sharp against the moonlit sky. Cole watched her from below, impressed by the quiet competence she carried like armor. When she came down, she tapped him twice on the arm and began showing him a series of hand signs. Simple ones at first: move, stop, get down. Then more subtle signals: 2 riders, danger left, circle wide. Her gestures were swift, graceful, carved from years of survival. Cole memorized each one. Together, they dug a shallow fire trench along the ranch's northern fence line. When lit, it would force attackers to funnel through the center, straight into Cole's rifle sight. They filled water barrels and set them by the barn door. Fallback positions. Last stands. Every step planned, every angle covered. Inside the cabin, Cole opened a wooden trunk and carefully lifted out a lever-action rifle, his late wife's. He held it a moment, thumb brushing the worn stock, before offering it to Talona. "Belonged to someone brave," he said quietly. Talona cradled the weapon with both hands, bowing her head. "I fight with honor," she whispered. And in that moment, standing amidst shadows and preparations, they weren't strangers anymore. Not savior and rescued. Not rancher and runaway. They were allies. A chosen family forged by danger, bound by the stand they had decided to make together. The night came down thick and heavy, like the whole sky was holding its breath. The moon hid behind a wall of rolling cloud, leaving the world washed in a cold, colorless glow. Even the wind seemed to know trouble was riding in. It slithered through the pines with a low, uneasy hiss that made the cabin walls tremble. Talona and I had been waiting for their return, waiting in that tense, brittle quiet that comes before a battle. Every lamp was snuffed out. Only the embers in the hearth pulsed like a dying heartbeat. I stood by the window, fingers resting lightly on the rifle's worn stock. Talona crouched near the doorframe, her eyes fixed, unblinking, sharp as a hunting cat's in the dark. She hadn't said a word for nearly an hour. She didn't have to. The fear was there, in the set of her jaw. But the fire was there too, burning just as fierce. Then, faint and distant, came the rumble. Hoofbeats. Not one. Not three. A swarm. They rolled across the frozen ground like thunder, closer and closer, until the sound pressed against the cabin walls. I exchanged a glance with Talona. She pressed 2 fingers to her brow, then flicked them toward the window, signal. Many riders. I nodded. The siege began. The first muzzle flash erupted outside like a burst of lightning. Then came the explosion, with splintering, glass bursting, gunfire raining against the cabin like a hailstorm. Shards of window panes scattered across the floor in glittering arcs. Talona ducked, rolled, and slid into position behind the heavy table we'd flipped earlier for cover. I fired through the broken window. 2 shots, methodical, deliberate. Talona waited half a heartbeat, then popped up and fired twice more, each in the space between my reports. Our rhythm held. The hand signals we'd practiced under lantern light hours before now guided every movement, every breath. Outside, men shouted, "Flush 'em out! Burn the place!" Their boots broke through the snow with violent thuds. Then the bright streak of torchlight slashed across the wall. Flames licked at the logs as they hurled burning branches onto the roof and against the sides of the cabin. Smoke curled upward, thick and black, gathering like a monster in the rafters. The fire was spreading too fast. "We move," I whispered. Talona nodded once. She grabbed her knife. I slung the rifle across my back. Smoke clung to our throats as we dropped through the back window and landed in the drift behind the cabin. We crawled low, letting the howling wind swallow the sound of our escape. When we reached the corral posts, I heard a grunt and then a scream. One of the riders spotted us. He lunged at Talona with a raised revolver, but she moved quicker. She sprang from the snow, arm flashing silver, and her knife embedded deep into his shoulder. The man howled, stumbling back, clutching his wound as she ripped the blade free. Another rider barreled toward me. I tackled him, slamming him into the water trough. The icy water erupted upward, soaking us both. He fought wildly, throwing fists, trying to drown me as he pushed my head under. I groped blindly underwater until my fingers found his holster strap. I yanked. The gun fell free. I cracked him across the jaw with it, sending him sprawling limp in the snow. A scream cut through the wind, a woman's scream. Talona's scream. I snapped around. Gareth Boone, the mining crew's leader, a brute of a man with shoulders like slabs of timber, had her by the hair. He dragged her across the ground, forcing her to her knees. His pistol glinted in the dark as he pressed it to her head. "You should have stayed hidden, girl," he snarled. "Your land's ours. And you. Let her go," I shouted. He pivoted slightly, tightening his grip. Talona didn't wait. Like a wildcat, she twisted, clawed, bit, anything to break free. Gareth cursed, smashing the butt of his pistol across her cheek. She staggered, dazed. He raised the gun to finish her. My revolver cracked like thunder. His weapon hand exploded in blood. Gareth roared, dropping the gun and clutching the mangled limb. Talona rose, breath heaving, eyes burning. She lifted the rifle I'd given her, my late wife's rifle, and with every ounce of fury in her small frame, she swung it. The butt connected with Gareth's skull with a sickening thud. He collapsed into the snow like a felled tree. The remaining riders saw their leader fall and panicked. They turned their horses and fled into the night, vanishing into the storm clouds gathering over the ridge. A deep rumble rolled across the sky. Then the rain came. Cold, hard, relentless. It crashed down in sheets, smothering the flames, consuming the cabin. Smoke hissed as the fire died, leaving only charred logs steaming in the downpour. The rain washed blood into the earth. It washed fear from our faces. Talona stood beside me, shaking with adrenaline, but alive. We had won. Morning didn't break that day. It slowly bled over the land, like the world wasn't sure if it deserved light after the night we'd lived through. The air smelled of wet ash and cooling gunpowder, drifting across the battered yard like a ghost that hadn't made up its mind to leave. I stepped out onto the porch with my ribs bound tight under my shirt, each breath reminding me that survival came at a price. But Talona's quiet silhouette on the ridge told me it was a price I'd pay again, without hesitation. She stood barefoot in the damp grass, her long dark hair lifted by the breeze, facing the rising sun with the steadiness of a stone carved into the land. She didn't move when I approached. She just breathed, slow and deep, like she was letting the new day pour into the empty places the night had tried to hollow out. When I stopped beside her, she didn't look at me, but her voice was gentle. "It is quiet now," she said. "My people believe that after storms, the earth listens again." I nodded, staring at the hills smeared gold. Feels like the first peaceful breath this ranch has had in years. Down below, the yard was a graveyard of last night's chaos. Splintered boards, charred patches of earth. The bodies had been carried past the tree line, buried beneath the cottonwoods, where the ground was soft enough to take a shovel. Only the weapons remained, leaned against a stump like rusted reminders of greed, cruelty, and the desperate kind of men who thought they could take whatever wasn't theirs. Talona knelt beside them now, touching the earth with 2 fingers. Her whisper was so soft I barely heard it. "For my brother," she murmured. "For my family. For their spirits, who see the sunrise from the mountains." I didn't speak, didn't place a hand on her shoulder or offer some word that would just fall short. Some grief needs silence more than comfort, and some prayers aren't meant to be shared. When she rose again, her eyes shone with something new. Not joy, not peace, but strength, steady as bedrock. We walked back toward the cabin together. The door, smashed off its hinge last night, had been repaired and propped open, welcoming the morning like a wounded thing refusing to close itself off from the world. Rainwater dripped from the eaves, pattering onto the mud in slow, rhythmic beats, washing away the soot and footprints left from the fight. Smoke curled from the chimney again, real smoke, alive and warm, not the choking kind that had filled the cabin hours before. I'd started a fire at first light, just to see the place breathe again. Talona paused at the doorway, tracing the new hinge with her thumb. "This home," she whispered. "It is still standing." "So are we," I said, and for the first time since the siege, she smiled, small, fragile, but bright as dawn breaking over fresh snow. She stepped inside, then turned back toward me. "If you wish," she said softly, "I stay. Help. Work. Live. Not forever, but long enough to repay what you gave." I shook my head, leaning against the porch post. "You don't owe me a damn thing, Talona. You stay because you want to, not because of any debt." I hesitated, then added, "This ranch could use another heartbeat around it. Been too quiet for too long." She considered that, then nodded once. "Then I stay," she said. "Now, I have people again." And as we walked into the cabin side by side, the broken world behind us seemed to stitch itself together. One beam of sunlight, one breath of cool morning air, one step toward a life neither of us expected but both of us had earned. A new family formed, not by blood, not by promises, but by bravery, and by surviving the night the world tried to end. I reckon there's a truth the frontier teaches a man if he lives long enough to hear it. Justice out here ain't found in courtrooms. And it sure ain't written on paper. It's carved in the cold, hammered by gunfire, and proven in the choices you make when the world ain't watching. Talona survived because she held on when everything around her tried to break her spirit. And me, I stood with her because no decent man turns his back on the innocent, not in a land this wild, where wolves walk on two legs and mercy is a rare kind of courage. If this tale stirred something in you, then stay in the saddle with us. Ride along for more stories forged in dust, firelight, and the hard truth of the West. Like the video, share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more frontier tales that refuse to die.